webinar. We're delighted to be joined by Professor David Grant from Hull, our speaker today. Professor David B. Grant is a Professor of Logistics and Director of the Logistics Institute and previous appointment at Heriot-Watt University and the University of Edinburgh, Calgary and Lethbridge. His business experience includes retail, corporate banking, technical design and financial and marketing consulting and seminar facilitation for clients in Canada and the United States. We have participants from all over the world with us today, so we are looking forward to lots of interesting questions and discussion. Please post your questions throughout the webinar, and Professor Grant is happy to answer as many of your questions as we have time for at the end of the webinar. So, David, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Leah, to yourself and Amba for allowing me to make this presentation. And the first thing to note is on the front slide is I've actually changed roles since we have been putting this together. I was director of the Logistics Institute here at the university, but now I'm Associate Dean for Business Engagement, which encompasses a bit more and a wider perspective. But I'm still Professor of Logistics, and that is still an area close to my heart. This topic to me, because it's close to my heart, I think is of interest to anybody in business, and it was the reason that we decided to run this particular webinar today. It might be a bit provocative by saying it's the most important aspect of business, but I want to be able to make my pitch to everybody listening to the webinar to be able to say, I think this is something you need to be concerned with within your own organization. And with that, the agenda is basically an overview. That's about all we have time for within the next 45 minutes to look at the context of logistics and this wider concept of supply chain management, to look at the importance of these areas and the challenges facing them and some of the strategic considerations that managers would want to think about. And then, as Leah has said, time allowing at the end, we will get into questions and answers. But I'd like to run a couple of polls first, if I may, because I don't know the audience, I don't know your current positions, but it would be nice to put up the first poll question, Leah, to find out how familiar are you, or are you familiar with the concepts of logistics and supply chain management? And we'll let you
I'm going to launch that poll now.
Okay.
And then I'll just give the attendees a minute or so to put in their answers.
Do that. Great.
Yep, they're trickling through.
Excellent. And then the second follow-up question is, and this would assume that you already know about this domain, is are any of you currently working within a logistics or supply chain capacity in your organization? And that'll be the second question.
Just waiting for a few more votes for the first question. But 91% have voted. A couple more delegates I'm waiting for.
Okay.
I'll give them another 15 seconds. 94%. Waiting for probably one or two people. Give them another 5 seconds before I close the poll. Okay, so 87% said yes, they were familiar with the concept of logistics and supply chain management, and 13% said no.
Okay. And then
so I can launch the second poll for you as well.
Poll, yep, that would be great. And in the meantime, though, since 87% of you have said you know about it, we can actually move on and begin sort of some of the contextual background.
Just
what are the definitions of these particular items? I use definitions provided by the U.S. Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. I am a member of that organization and have been involved in their Education Strategies Committee for a number of years. We have a bit of angst in academia about what supply chain management and logistics management really mean, but I think that CSCMP has done a good job of making that differentiation. Logistics management is all about the effective and efficient flow of and storage of goods, services, and information between point of origin and point of consumption in order to meet the requirements of a customer. And so that gets you into the functional areas of inventory management, transportation, warehousing, and so on. Supply chain management is a much broader concept. and it's involved in sourcing, procurement, conversion, and the logistics management activities. Basically, it primarily looks at coordination and collaboration with channel partners who can be suppliers, intermediaries, third-party service providers like DHL and FedEx, and of course the customers. So I see logistics management as being part of a wider supply chain management function, but a lot of times these terms may be used interchangeably. If we want to look at a simplified supply chain, this is very simplified. That comes out of my textbook that was published last year by Prentice Hall. If we focus in the center of the diagram, we see what's known as the focal firm. And as academics and practitioners, we like to look at that and say, this is us. And so we get into this idea of tiering. Our immediate customers are our first tier. The customers that they may have would be a second tier. And the same holds going towards suppliers going upstream in the supply chain. But where it gets complex is our first tier supplier, if they're the focal firm, we become their first tier customer, and so on and so forth. So it's very important to know where you are within a supply chain, how much engagement you will have with tier 1 and possibly tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers going forward, and in global supply chains that becomes very important. I also like to break down the logistics activities into two basic formats. One is stop, where there's in storage, or it's inventory lying around waiting to go on to the next step, or go, which is transportation. So when do we move and put goods into market or into shipping to get to the next level or next processing function? So these are the two basic things we have to be concerned with strategically. On a strategic basis, a lot of logisticians like to use Michael Porter's value chain because the word logistics appears in it twice. We bring goods in, we may perform operations on them or some sort of value-added service, and then we send them out. And it's interesting that Porter noted that logistics, operations, marketing, sales, and service are the primary activities of a business. He considers firm infrastructure, human resources, technology, procurement as sort of secondary or support activities. I'm not saying that he's right or he's wrong. It's just an interesting focus that he has. But in supply chain management, we also focus a lot on the procurement and purchasing of goods and services. And in fact, some folks in the procurement sector like to think that supply chain is all about them due to the fact that they do a lot of that sourcing and purchasing, and the word supply means bringing the supplies in. But that's okay. We can live with those definitions and sort of this focus as to how we want to look at strategy within the organization. Why have these topics become very important over the last few decades? There's a number of reasons. Firstly is the intensification of competition. We have deregulated transport across Europe and the US and in other parts of the world, and because of that, trade has been able to move quicker. We have changed notions of movement of goods from big ships with lots of small goods into containers, which now travel much more freely. We've gone beyond this idea of a product to sort of a product and service. And so especially if we're in an online environment as a customer and we want to buy something, we not only want it, we want it delivered, we want it delivered at a certain time. So consumer and customer expectations have changed significantly regarding service delivery, price, so on and so forth. Due to globalization that has been fostered by deregulation, liberalization of trade and so forth, we've seen great changes in channel powers. Global brands such as Apple have emerged to manufacture products in Asia, ship to markets across the world, with a lot of the design and background product development being done in California at their head offices. We have a notion of whether or not there's power between retailers and manufacturers. A case in point is in the United Kingdom, where over the last 20 years, power has shifted from food manufacturers to the big food retailers such as Tesco, Sainsbury, and Asda, who are owned by Walmart. IT has played a major role in this as well in the last 20 or 30 years. We have much more functionality, power, and lower cost for computing services today than we did back then. And I think a popular urban story is the fact that a smartphone today has more processing and computer power than the Apollo 13 and 11 rockets that went off to the moon. And so it's very interesting to see how all that technology has shaped what we do now with the various consumer products that we have, such as tablets, smartphones, Blu-ray DVDs, and so on, that weren't even in existence 15 years ago. Many more things for consumers to buy, and therefore a lot more product focus in the marketplace. But one thing that was missing for a long time is the notion of profit leverage. That in fact it's probably easier to save 10% of your logistics costs than it is to increase your sales, and that can be shown mathematically, because to get an increase in your profit margin, you have to sell a lot more goods than possibly reducing costs. And that has been applied to the logistics and supply chain function in a large fashion. What are the important trends and challenges? Certainly this is a list of them. We will go through a lot of them in detail. It's not necessarily an exhaustive list. It's a list that we keep seeing over and over as we do academic research in this domain. And I think these are the key things. Firstly is the notion of costs. How much do countries actually spend on their logistics activities? CSCMP likes to look at a percentage cost of gross domestic product, whereas in Europe we tend to track logistics costs as a percentage of sales revenue. And those numbers have been falling from the mid-1980s until today, where we're much less than 10% in terms of logistics costs being a percentage. However, that's not the case around the world. I have a number of students doing PhDs and other studies with me here in Hull who come from Thailand. And currently, logistics costs as a percentage of GDP in Thailand are about 25%. So there are some variations across the globe, and one of the interesting challenges going forward in the next couple of decades is to try and determine how we bring developing countries more to a more efficient Western view of how you can reduce costs and those sorts of things. In terms of logistics costs by functions, and I apologize that this particular 9.4% wasn't on the previous graph with Europe, but in the US in 2008, the total cost of all logistics activities represented $1.3 trillion. Most of that was tied up in transportation costs, which were about $882 billion if you include both trucking and other types of carriers. And of course the bulk of that was made up in the various trucks that run around the highways in North America. The same holds pretty much here in Europe as well, where transportation is the big piece and a lot of road transportation. Why road? Well, it's convenient, it's door-to-door service, it's predictable, and you don't have to change into different modes. However, when you come across many borders, intermodal transport has made great inroads in the last few years to be able to take a single unit, a container, and put it onto a flatbed truck at source, take it to a port, put it on a container ship, bring it to another port, put it on a rail car, put it on a truck, and then take it into a distribution center for a company to work with. But this just gives an idea of the size and scope of the costings. These numbers are a few years old now, but they haven't changed significantly since the recession has begun in 2008. But what about companies? How much do they spend on logistics activities? In 2010, it was 8.3% of GDP, and of that, the companies were spending about 63% on transportation, 23% on inventory, and then warehousing and administration lagged behind. In Europe, it was a bit different, and roughly 7.2% of GDP, and transportation in that case was about 48%, and warehousing was about 25%. And this is a holdover or a legacy before the European Union of a lot of organizations having national distribution centers in the many countries in Europe. We are now at EU 28 with the admittance of Croatia to the European Union this past week. And so the need for having all of those distribution centers will probably change over time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. In terms of global trade and the key trading lanes, and this is work that has been done by Maersk a few years ago, predicting what the case would be in a couple of years. As we can see, trade between Asia and Europe is about 42 million TEUs, and those are 20-foot equivalent units of containers in a year. That will be the flows in a couple of years. Across the Atlantic, it's only about 6 million. Trans-Pacific from Asia to North America, South America is about 31 million. And when I first saw this, what surprised me was the amount of intra-Asia movements of goods of about 45 million TEUs, more than what is going into Asia as finished, or pardon me, out of Asia into Europe as finished goods. What that means is Asia has become sort of the manufacturing and production center of the world to be able to make the goods and services that we enjoy, and a lot of movements and goods going back and forth between different countries for manufacturing and processing. And again, as noted with my example of Thailand and their percentage of GDP logistics costs, some great inroads to be made here in making the Asian area probably more efficient in what they do. The restructuring of the supply chains, as mentioned a few minutes ago, where should we have our warehouses or sheds, as we like to call them, to store goods? A lot of centralization of production capacity has gone on, and this is followed with trying to centralize stock holding in, say, European distribution centers or national distribution centers. That hasn't quite caught up yet, and there has been a debate recently as to whether or not there should be more local sourcing, more local warehousing and availability of products, and this is in light of some of the risk factors that we have seen recently in food products and those kinds of things. Costs are also important in this. Where are your markets? How easy are you able to source transportation? Are you linked very closely to airports or major freeways or rail networks? And so a lot of these issues need to take place to determine where the best place to have your organization and your production and your warehouses are. Time compression is a popular term in logistics and supply chain, and it basically relates to what we call the order lead time or the order cycle time. The amount of time it takes from when we place an order as a company until we actually receive it at our door. That has decreased significantly from the late 1980s, falling from about 100 days to around 44. And this is including an increase in globalization, which means that goods are coming from Asia on a container ship, taking approximately 4 weeks to get here into Europe from Shanghai or Singapore. So supply chains have gotten a lot quicker. They have also gotten a lot more complex. This is a breakaway diagram provided by Boeing of their 787 Dreamliner, which I think is back flying again after the battery issues. But it just indicates the complexity of where products are made in various countries, how they all have to come together into Seattle and Washington to be assembled into a Boeing 787. And the same holds for the A380 Airbus, which is made in Europe and across Europe, with wings being made in the United Kingdom and then shipped by boat to France to go to be assembled in Toulouse. So a lot of complexity, many more parts, a lot of transportation, and we all want it a lot quicker. On a consumer level, we have seen a great shrinkage in the product life cycle of a product. There's nothing older than yesterday's smartphone. And I like to joke with students here about who has an iPhone 5, and if they don't, then they're not seen as being in touch with their colleagues. So a very interesting discussion about how long should products last. Product innovation and technology such as tablets, iPhones, iPads, flat screen televisions means that new features are enhanced all the time, and therefore we don't keep products around as long as we used to. Product life cycle, you never want to get caught with excess inventory at the end, so an issue for both logisticians and product managers is knowing when you want to shut off production to get new products into the marketplace and not be stuck with the old. But while all of this time compression, reduction in life cycles, and everything else has been going on, it's delightful to me to note that within Europe, the quality of performance and service has actually improved. From a 10-year period of 1993 to 2003, the number of incomplete deliveries fell by about half, the number of damaged deliveries the same, and the number of late deliveries by about a third. So we're getting products to market to customers quicker, many more products, and yet the service quality is going on with that. The European Logistics Association, who prepared these statistics, have not updated them because it would be interesting to see what kind of gains have been made in the last 10 years since 2003. I suspect they may be marginal, and that's probably best illustrated by the graph on deliveries damaged, where it seems to be starting to get asymptotic. Risks to logistical systems and supply chains is very important, and they come in many shapes and forms. Political unrest on the right-hand side, which of course we have seen around the world in many areas in the last numbers of years, naturally disrupt your supply chain. These are somewhat controllable because they are political, but certainly for an organization you may have less influence on it than you might like. Environmental disruption is outside your control, and on the left-hand side we can see a picture of the tsunami wave that hit a number of years ago in Asia, also the volcano in Iceland that erupted in 2010. And I have fond memories of that as I was teaching in Seoul, South Korea at the time on a global master's we do in logistics, and I had to stay an extra 5 days because European airspace was closed and I couldn't fly back. In the middle are also controllable issues, and the most controllable issues for an organization, and this relates to quality. Recently we've had the Horsegate scandal, if you want to call it that, where some form of horse meat was getting into the food supply chain and being sold as beef meat in European markets, and the amount of effort to try and trace the supply chain, find out where that came from and where the problem was, has taken considerable time, not only for the retailers involved, but also the producers and manufacturers. And it's the most recent one. There have been other issues with quality before. The bottom photo talks about Toyota and the quality problems that they have had recently in terms of braking systems not working and valves not being appropriate. What's interesting about Toyota is it's always held up as a vanguard of the Toyota production system, where they were able to become very efficient through lean techniques and just-in-time techniques, where their tier 1 suppliers were literally a mile and a half down the road to feed into their supply chain. What has happened in Japan and to Toyota over the last number of years is that they have had to rely on going to other markets and outsource some of their activities to other countries in Asia because of the cost of production in Japan. I think that might be a major factor in what's going on here because the fact that you outsource to another organization means you lose a little bit of control on the process. And if that's not done carefully, you can end up with products that are substandard to what your needs are or could cause safety issues. So all of these risks have also increased over the last 10 or 15 years. The natural environment is certainly something that is very important for everybody today. How can we reduce our impact upon the natural environment in terms of carbon emissions, other greenhouse gases, traffic congestions, and one that's been raised about the notion of food miles. Okay, this particular graph or diagram on the left comes from a newspaper article a number of years ago looking at how Britons were able to have 24,000 miles of food miles for their Christmas dinner. The poultry coming from Thailand, and that's about 1,000 miles. Various vegetables coming from Africa, around 5,000 miles, and so on and so forth. The issue, though, there for me is, what do we do about products that aren't naturally grown in an area? If we like to wear cotton clothing in Northern Europe, we cannot grow cotton in this environment. It has to come from a very hot climate where it will grow naturally. And so the question then becomes, if we want to wear cotton clothing, we are always going to have to ship cotton to the markets. Do we do it, though, as finished goods, or do we do it in bulk and then process into finished goods later? These are issues that firms are now dealing with, particularly with some of the risk factors that have gone on in other areas, such as the factory collapsing in Bangladesh a couple of months ago. And a topic now for firms to think about is this notion of reshoring, bringing production back home where they have a little bit more control over the process, less risk, and they can get it to market a little bit better. But how does that also translate into other things such as reducing carbon emissions, traffic congestion, and so on and so forth? And as logisticians, we always have to face these issues because we're always asked to do so by government and by consumers to try and reduce carbon footprint. Now that we've had a look at sort of the trends and challenges, what does this mean for the firm, and why is it important? Customer service for a customer is provided through product availability and service excellence. For example, in a retail setting, it is on-shelf availability. When we go into our local shops, are the products and goods on display for us to purchase at the time? In terms of further upstream in the supply chain, it could be getting products in pallet loads or container loads in full, on time, with no errors. So the idea is that we want to ensure that the right products are at the right place, at the right time, right condition, right quantity, and of course at the right cost. Thus, activities of logistics provide time and place utility for customers, if we use the term from economics. We have the right product in the right place. This also finds its way into the online environment when consumers are ordering from companies such as Amazon or other internet suppliers. We want the product when we want it. We want it in good nick or good condition, and we want it at a very good price. We have done some research on sort of service quality in online, and at that point, consumers probably have done the hygiene factor work of looking at product type, product model, features, and now they're looking to get it the cheapest, quickest, best way possible to their door. At that point, consumers become almost like logisticians themselves. And the research work that we have done behind that supports that notion that they're concerned about availability, when can it be delivered, what happens if it's broken, how can I return it, and so on and so forth. So logistics looks at sort of cost minimization and reliability, but supply chain management as a wider discipline involving many more actors within the supply chain provides a competitive advantage. And that is done through what we call both the value advantage and the productivity advantage. If we can improve utilization of our logistical assets, such as warehouses and vehicles, and design our logistical systems to take advantage of that, we can also synchronize supply with demand and try and increase the rate of stock rotating through the system. So in other words, not a lot of excess inventory carrying around. Then we can get a very good productivity advantage. On the other hand, if we look at what customers and consumers are looking for, they're looking for value, and value, of course, is perceived benefits minus costs. And so are we able to get them products and services more quickly, more reliably? Can we tailor that particular product and service to their needs? And there's excellent examples of doing that in a quick fashion. Certainly in fast fashion clothing, Zara and H&M are held up as exemplars of that. They can take design ideas and things that they see on celebrities and turn them into a finished product in store within 2 weeks. Using technology, using Blackberries and smartphones and other types of technology to send information upstream to the designers who are in La Coruña in Spain. But doing all of this involves a notion of trade-offs. And so cost trade-offs are easy to figure out. If we have an increased cost in one activity, that should be offset by a cost reduction in another. And so therefore we'll get an overall reduction in total cost. A cost service trade-off is concerned about taking that extra step, providing an extra level of service to a consumer to warrant that additional cost. If we look at some of the levels of the logistical trade-offs that we see, you can have them within particular activities. So do we do our own in-house transportation, or do we get third-party transportation with firms like FedEx, DHL, and UPS? The trade-off between logistical activities is related to having more transport versus less inventory. If we move goods quicker and we have lots more transportation, we need less goods sitting in warehouses to be able to fulfill because of low transportation. But again, you have different costs. The third is between the actual logistics activities and functions and other business functions. So how can we cut distribution costs but try to increase sales at the same time? Folks in the marketing department will always want to ensure that we have lots of stock available to meet customer needs, especially if all of a sudden there's a rush to increase purchases. But what is the impact of that on the rest of the logistics system? Can those goods flow through the system quickly enough to meet the customer's needs and meet the order? And then lastly, we have trade-offs between companies. So one company can cut its inventory costs by getting the suppliers to deliver more frequently, or it could even have the suppliers manage it in a process known as vendor managed inventory, or VMI. And Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and some of the large fast-moving consumer goods manufacturers are doing this in some of the large retailers. They will actually look after the stock that's in store, replenish the stock, make sure the display is working correctly in conjunction with the retailer. And that saves the retailer having to do these kinds of activities, but make sure that goods are available for customers at the appropriate time. And what is our role in assisting understanding as logisticians? And I have taken this quote from Stan Fawcett, Matt Waller, and the late Don Bowersox from the Journal of Business Logistics. Stan and Matt are the editors. Don Bowersox is one of the founding editors, and he's one of our leading lights in logistics and supply chain management. Basically, logistics and supply chain management represent legitimate but essential arenas for business and development. We have a number of theories. We need to work with the business community and other functional areas to develop those. And the idea is, as we discover specific knowledge, synthesize that knowledge into a higher level of integrated understanding, we can get two very important outcomes. We can advance the frontier of these disciplines, and so therefore we can help improve corporate performance as a whole and societal well-being by making fast, efficient, environmentally friendly movements of products to market. And the other thing that I quite like that they have focused on is that we can see that the business school's ugly stepdaughter has grown up, that she's just not wearing Cinderella's glass slipper, but she has actually a key to the CEO suite. Logistics has been underrepresented in business for a long time, but I hope that by chatting to you today and bringing you some of the issues, challenges, and aspects of what this can do, you have a better appreciation for how important that can be to your own organization or business as a whole. And of course, my mission is to ensure that a lot of people have a good understanding of this particular topic I would like to see it sort of at high school level on the national curriculum in the UK, because in Britain it represents about 75 billion to the GDP of the country. So it's an important issue. I hope I've been able to demonstrate that to you today. I may not have convinced all of you, but I do want to thank you for taking the time to listen this afternoon. And with that, Leah, we're finished a little bit early, but we have lots of time for questions and answers.
That's perfect. Thank you very much for that, David. I've got quite a few questions, so I'll start off with some of the early ones that I've been sent, and if anyone has any more, just feel free to send them through. So the first question is, sometimes service occurs during the operations, so how will this diagram be adapted accordingly? This was sent at one of your earlier diagrams, I believe.
Okay, and that will be probably the diagram of the simplified supply chain. That diagram shows nodes between organizations. I think this is, if they're referring to that diagram, they might be referring to Porter's value chain. It depends on how you define a service, and I define logistics as service activities. We do not primarily change a product or the function of a product through logistics activities. We essentially move it from one point to another. If we're processing or adding value by remanufacturing or further processing, then that's a different item. But finished goods that arrive at a dock or a port in Asia and then go onto a container ship and come to Europe or North America, essentially there's not a lot of value added other than time, being able to make time move through. How you might represent that on the diagram, I haven't given a lot of thought to that. It's an interesting aspect, but one of the areas that I work in is basically the services, marketing, and service quality aspects of logistical activities to meet customer needs. So I'm a failed marketer in some respects, and I appreciate that's an important piece that's to be there. But without quite understanding which diagram and the depth of that question, I think we could show it. I'm just quite not sure at this moment. Next question, Leah. And if that person who asked that question wants to come back in with a clarification, I'd be happy to look at that as well.
Perfect. And we've got another question, which is, any thoughts on sustainability supply chain? Yes,
lots. I teach actually the Sustainable Logistics module here to our MSc students, and without wanting to be shameless, I am a co-author, lead author of a book on sustainable logistics and supply chain management that is being published by Kogan Page and should be into your bookshops within the next month or so. What's interesting to me is the concept of sustainability is much more than, say, carbon emissions. We have a globe that has an ecosystem and has certain activities that go on that we all depend upon. And so to me, the concept of sustainability has two meanings. There is certainly the corporate sustainability where firms stay in business, make profits, and live. But the other one is the ecological aspect. And that includes raw materials and resources that we require to manufacture products. And that leads us into scarcity of resources. Can we recycle and all of those things? We have population growth. And there's a chap by the name of Emmett who's written a book on 10 billion, which he believes will be the population of the planet by the end of the century. And he essentially thinks we're doomed. He doesn't quite say that. He uses a word I don't want to use in the public domain. But essentially, how will we feed people? Where will they live? And all of those issues. Related closely to that is the concept of water. Fresh water to drink, water for production of products and agriculture, water to bathe in, and he believes, and some others do, that some of the resource wars in future will be over fresh water as it will be over resources. Food. How can we produce food and enough food to feed the 10 billion people that will be around? So sustainability is a much wider concept to me, and it has implications in logistics and supply chain all the way across the piece. Where will food be produced? Where should it be shipped to? How can we find fresh water? How can we recycle? How can we limit use of energy and or natural resources in our production processes and our logistics capabilities. So a very broad subject that we can't do justice with in the next 10 minutes or so. And but it's important, and I think it will be one of the defining features of how we improve our supply chains over the next 10 or 15 years. Next question, Leah.
Perfect. Someone has said, more transportation means more emissions.
Possibly. What we have seen is a great reduction in the amount of emissions for engines in trucks over the last 10 or 15 years. Trucks are becoming more fuel efficient. The engines are getting better. However, as we have more transportation, even if there are less emissions, you're still going to have a gross number of total emissions. The question then becomes, what do we do to effect that from a logistics perspective? Can we have local sourcing for foodstuffs? We bring bananas from Central and South America by container ship into the UK, and then they're put on trucks, taken to distribution centers for food retailers, and then shipped out. Now, we can't grow bananas in the United Kingdom, but there's lots of things that we can grow. So should we be bringing products in from around the world that we can grow locally? That also suggests a return to something that folks call seasonality. We only have strawberries at this time of year around Wimbledon when they're grown in the United Kingdom. But you can buy strawberries 365 days a year at the supermarkets around the UK. Strawberries that are grown in Spain, Morocco, and elsewhere in warm climates in winter stock our shelves. Are we as consumers prepared to move back to a simpler structure of when we had foodstuffs and seasonality and give up having 100% availability 100% of the time to enhance the environment, get trucks off the road, and so on and so forth? So the point is well taken, but what are we prepared to do as a society to change our behaviors to reflect that? Next question, Leah.
Perfect. So this is quite a long one. So it's regarding the risk to logistical systems. Do you think it's all about the quality of SCM? As you have adequately superior SCM, you'll be able to handle with political and environmental disruption through, for example, a planned alternative.
Yes, absolutely. Organizations in looking at their supply chains need to consider the risks that will come to them. There is an organization called Business Continuity, and I forget the last name of it, but they look at how can you maintain your business continuity when you have a disruption. And so things like redundancy, additional plant capacity, extra stock, so on and so forth. Organizations can take that into effect and can reduce risk to their supply chains. The problem is when you do those kinds of activities, you will spend more money to be able to do that. You'll have to have extra production capacity or extra plant. You'll have to have extra warehouses with extra stock, and that costs money. So does the firm want to do that? And the interesting thing is, it's the Business Continuity Institute, that's what it is, BCI. Back around the turn of the last decade, at the turn of the millennium, seems interesting to say that now, but we are in 2013, they did a survey of people looking at risk factors within organizations, and the usual suspects of fire and these kinds of things were highly regarded by organizations, and they had business continuity plans in place. When they asked about supply chains, only 25% of businesses said, well, we're aware of that risk, and no one had a supply chain continuity plan in place at that time. I think that has changed over the last 13 years, given all of the things that have gone on in the marketplace. So it can be done, but it just costs extra money to do so. So at what point do you trade off profitability to reduce your risk? Leah, I don't think we ever got from you the percentage of people who are actually employed in this sector now, which was our poll question 2. Did you have those results for us, please?
I do. 35% said yes, they were currently working in that sector, and 65% said no.
Great, that's super. That's tremendous. That's good. I'm glad there's some logisticians and supply chain managers sitting in today. Another question, Leah.
Yep, perfect. So we've got another long one. So in the notion of logistics cost minimization, do you think this notion is contradict to the value contribution to the wider society? Would it be more suitable to optimize rather than minimize the cost of logistics in today's environment?
Very good question. And I think this goes along with what I have been commenting about a little while ago. What trade-offs are we as society willing to make in terms of what we purchase, what we need, that can then in turn make trade-offs in terms of the logistical costs and activities? If I can come back to this particular Horsegate scandal, just as an example, what we found was there were strains of horse meat, horse DNA within beef products. Now, when I sat and thought about this as a logistician, and I wasn't asked by this by the local media, which is interesting because they usually do, when they would have said, who's at fault? Is it the retailer or the supplier? I would have said everybody in the supply chain. Today in the UK and I think in parts of Europe, you can go in and buy ready-made meals to pop holes into the film on top, plunk into your microwave for 2 minutes, and you have dinner. I'm not saying that's high quality eating, but that's a lot of people are doing that. And they want it at the lowest price that they can. Because of that, the supermarkets, certainly in the UK, are more than happy to try and meet the needs of the consumer and are selling these types of products for £1 or £1.50. And of course, I can't understand if that even meets the cost of production. However, in doing so, the retailers then have to go to their suppliers and put pressure on them to reduce prices. Those suppliers in turn then have to get sub-suppliers or subcontractors to supply to them at lower prices. And you're opening yourself up to this level of risk. Now, what was interesting about this particular scandal is I didn't see the actual packaging of the products. If the products had said lasagna, in the case of one example, and it didn't say beef, then I would say, what's the problem? The only problem is if it was marketed as beef lasagna, but it had other animals in it, then it's misrepresentation and mis-selling. The other issue from a health and safety perspective was that some of this horse DNA had some sort of antibiotics that they give to horses found in there, which are harmful to humans. So to me, the risk there, or the consumer outrage, should only be at misrepresentation or health and safety. Consumers are demanding these products at these low prices. Supermarkets are happy to meet our needs by selling us those products at that price, but then have to turn around to their suppliers and get the products in at landed cost cheaper. Something has to give. And so I will start at the consumer end and say, at what point do we want to pay more for our food and or come back to this idea of seasonality and not have strawberries available all year round on a fresh basis on our supermarket shelves? And then we can optimize supply chains to be better for society and the environment as a whole, but does that meet consumer needs and consumer demand? So that's a big ask and a big trade-off, and I can't give you an answer as to what we will do or what we should do. I leave it up to organizations and consumers to make their own judgments on that. Next question, Leah.
Perfect. So someone said, what about Dell mode?
Dell mode. Dell, let me talk about Dell from my perspective, and I'm not sure if this will answer the question. Dell has a very interesting supply chain of how they do things. They certainly adhere to a lot of what I would call Taylorism or Fordism, where they have an assembly line, and I have been to a Dell factory when it was in Ireland to see this. Products come down a conveyor belt, people snap together the laptops and what have you, and they go out the other end, and it's the same as making a Model T Ford in the 1920s. They talk about a lot of volume and variety, but in fact it's a bit of a mathematical trick. If you have 3 or 4 different cases, 3 or 4 different display types, 3 or 4 different processors, 3 or 4 different hard drives. You can do 4 factorial by 4 factorial and so on and so forth, and come up with a larger number of available products just by switching variety of component sets within it. It works very well for Dell. The other interesting thing is I'm not convinced whether they're a computer manufacturer or a banker. They have been very proud at seminars I've been at by saying that their cash-to-cash time within the supply chain is about minus 45 days. So in other words, they collect your money as a consumer today, and they pay their suppliers in 45 days. So they sit on your money and earn interest on it until they have to pay their supplier. So that's a very interesting way for them to run a business. And so are they really a banker or are they a computer manufacturer? I leave that for the audience to judge. I hope that answers the question of the respondent. I'm not sure if it did, but that's my take on Dell.
Perfect. So we've got another one. So the other question was, how logistics and SCM be applied to a service provider company? I think that's how would logistics and SCM be applied to a service provider company?
Okay. I will have to define a service provider company. A number of different examples. If we think of McDonald's as a fast food service outlet, the product you buy is, a hamburger or chips or those kinds of things, but it's basically providing fast food service. And how they have applied it has been very unique. Certainly a lot of standardization, a lot of factory work within the back room of McDonald's. I had a family relative once who was a manager of one, so I've seen the operations management manual for it, and it's about 3 or 4 inches thick, or about 5, more than that, 20 centimeters thick. Everything is done to a process and a formula, and it's meant to push stuff through the system faster and faster. The way they have set up their service offering is all based on logistics, with the order taking, the computer screens to fire off signals to the back to get the order ready, the fact that they can put chips into a basket, put them in, set a timer, and all of that works very well for them. Their process of how they get ingredients and products is very localized. They tend to try and buy local where they can, so from local suppliers of bread products, meat products for the hamburgers, and so on and so forth, so that they reduce their risk, but they also seem to integrate themselves into a community. So from that perspective, that's how McDonald's can do it. In terms of other service organizations and logistics, we can look at things such as banking. How can banking affect logistics and what happens there? It's a different context because, of course, banking services are being done usually electronically by being able to transfer funds or move accounts and money across the globe in an instant. And so they depend very much on technology at that point to assist them in their logistical functions. We had a seminar here on international trade finance a couple of years ago, and I had done some corporate banking in an earlier life back in Canada in the 1980s. And I was surprised to find that organizations are still using paper international letters of credit to buy and sell products across global boundaries. So if I want to buy products from an Asian supplier, they will demand a letter of credit that has been authorized by my bank that they can take to their bank to get the money. I would have thought that in about 20 years we would have taken that idea and turned that into an electronic piece. But the paper-based product is still very important in international trade finance. But in that case of a bank doing normal transactions electronically, it's the information technology and the connectivity with other systems that will be able to effect the time flow of cash to make these things happen. So those are 2 examples of services. I hope that answers the question for the respondent. But do we have another question, Leah?
Yep, we have several. So could you please expand on the ways in which SCM can provide competitive advantage and contribute to value creation?
Yes. If we go back to the slide that was previous to that, and I believe the slides are going to be available at some point along with this presentation through
Yep, they will
Emma.
be sent out to everyone.
Okay. The notion of time and place utility. As consumers or customers, we want things, we want them now. And so the value adding that we can provide is to get goods to us in that timely manner to meet our needs. And we can tailor those particular products. The productivity advantage comes from doing it quicker through our logistical systems. Let me give you an example of Sun Microsystems in their computer hardware that they sell to customers and on an industrial scale and also consumers. They have monitors made in one Asian country, let's say Thailand, central processing units for their desktops made in China, and possibly the keyboards made in Indonesia. Now, when we were working with them, and this is their office is based in Lithgow in Scotland for the UK and Europe market, they did have products shipped all the way here to be assembled into customer orders and sent out. They then added value through their third-party logistics provider, and I can't remember who that was, but I believe it may have been DHL, where the containers of these individual components were brought into Singapore. They were then taken off the port to a location where the containers were opened up and individual customer orders were assembled on the spot, so matching the right number of monitors with processing units with keyboards, and put back into the container and shipped direct to the customer without ever having come to the United Kingdom. And so by using logistics service providers as third party or even fourth party, because this is now getting into the definition of a fourth party LSP, to be able to provide these added value services for you, they were able to take time out of the marketplace, meet customer orders in a much quicker fashion. And so that's an example of both the productivity and value advantage working together at the same time. And that, to me, is how organizations can do that activity to provide better competitive advantage. I hope that's answered the question. Leah, any more?
Yep, loads more. I work for a mining company here in Ghana. Now with the current reduction in gold price at the world market, what do you think our supply chain should be doing differently? Our company's survival depends on that.
Okay, very good point. It's an interesting question. Gold is required for not only jewelry, but obviously in electrical connections and connectivity. And I think this is probably the result of lack of demand for gold in the last few years due to the recession. On a strategic basis with the supply chain, how is the product being sent to market? Is it being sent in raw ore state where somebody then has to refine and extract the gold from the mineral rock and then process it? Or are you doing that at site? And to enhance value for somebody who's wanting to purchase gold, the company may consider actually getting into the processing of it at the mine site to be able to send out smaller quantities of refined or finished gold ore as opposed to large chunks of rock that contain gold in them that need to be processed and smelted later. That's one opportunity. Whether that's feasible or not with the organization, because that would require huge capital investment to do so, is a different issue. But that's one way of considering that. Otherwise, ore, be it gold, iron ore, or any of these kinds of products, are very much bulk, and so they're well suited to shipping by bulk container ships or rail cars of those sorts of nature. You don't fly gold unless it's in sort of in finished form as a Rolex watch, just because of the cost. It's too high to do that. So I think off the top of my head, that's the only thing I can think of at the moment, is to take the raw product, turn it into something that's much more usable for folks where they could get it a lot quicker and at a cheaper cost. Hope that helps.
Perfect. We'll take one more question now, and it's from Phil Mundy, and it's, is it possible we head towards a centralized / specialized logistics service provider that prevents this area being competitive advantage to the few.
Sorry, could you repeat that for me again, Leah?
Is it possible we head towards a centralized / specialized logistics service provider that prevents this area being competitive advantage to the few?
I think what this question is asking is we're having less suppliers of the products. That's possible. We have seen that in terms of, in the United Kingdom, food retailing. I've mentioned that the power has shifted to them because there's only about 4 or 5. And anybody who's done some economics will understand the term oligopoly. They sort of control the marketplace. At the same time, we have seen a concentration of fast-moving consumer good manufacturers to the Unilevers, P&Gs of the world, Nestle's. We've also seen the same thing with logistics service providers. So DHL, UPS, FedEx are very large global players. But I think that the concern is maybe a little ill-founded because you're always going to need other organizations to be involved in the logistical and supply chain processes. If we think to the food retailers, Procter & Gamble, Unilever can't supply everything that Asda and Tesco need. There will always be smaller organizations to be able to do that. There will always be a need, certainly in the UK context, for smaller retail locations in small villages, communities where the big players aren't. So there will be some competition in that fashion. In terms of the logistics service providers, a lot of the larger firms like DHL will get into some of the more repetitive, very concentrated type of activity like home delivery, but there are actually specialist companies like Yodel who can do that and do that in conjunction with major products coming from DHL. So I think at the moment there's enough capacity for smaller organizations to be able to participate in all business activities, but the question about concentration of large organizations is a good one. We've heard about that for decades in terms of big oil. There's only so many oil companies around who are involved in manufacturing and refining petroleum products for us to use as consumers. Part of that is economies of scale. You have to be big to do these things, and so therefore it's going to naturally attract only a few firms. But I think we do have enough safeguards, and if not, there's always legislation that governments can look at to prevent abuse by large organizations against society.
Perfect. Well, that's all the questions we have time for. So sorry for anyone who sent through a question and it's not been answered. Feel free to contact David. His email address will be on the presentation, but we'll be sending out at a later date to all who registered. I'd just like to thank Professor Grant once again for your time and what was a most interesting talk, which was definitely proved by all of the questions which we've had. And thank you very much to all of the people who listened to the presentation and sent through questions. It's great that it works both ways, and it's great that we can make it interactive. So thank you very much to everyone who tuned in, and feel free to keep in touch with us and look on our website for any up-and-coming webinars which we'll be having. And I hope everyone has a great day.
And Leah, I just want to add to that to thank all the participants who stuck with this for an hour to listen today. Thank you for your support of AMBA as well as for this particular topic. I have enjoyed it, and I wish you all the best. And as Leah has said, my email is on the screen now, but will also be available to you if you have any specific questions. But if you do write, please note that you were listening in on the AMBA webinar, so I know the source. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.